Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Uxtsuki. In this video, I'm gonna talk about material. What is material? Material is basically what the things that we are looking at is made of, right? Something might be made out of wood, out of metal, out of anything actually. How can we in pixel art make materials? First, I want you to understand that materials usually, right, are basically texture plus specularity plus reflection. So for example, if you think about wood, the texture of wood are pretty chaotic and organic. It is not a specular, so actually the lights are pretty diffuse and the reflection are basically non-existent unless it is waxed. So this is what is metal, like iron or either gold. The texture is pretty smooth unless it is old or damaged. The specularity is pretty strong, and the reflection, if it is polished, is pretty high as well. Last but not least, let's think about mirror, for example. Texture of a mirror is smooth, plain. The specularity is kind of dubious. If you add something that is shiny or bright, we are actually seeing a copy of it. And the reflection is the max reflection we might ever have in nature. So having this in mind, let's try to break down each part of this in pixel art. So the reflection actually might be not done correctly because when we make things, for example, in this type of canvas or something, we do not have a background, so images or props that could be reflected actually does not exist in this type of scenario. So this actually kills the reflection idea. So if you are making something that is pretty reflective, such as metal, water, mirrors, you need to imply there is a background. There is an ambient, like an environment surrounding this piece. Even if it is just a black background in here, you need to add reflections in the object, in the material, in order to sell the idea of reflection. The specularity is how defined a bright might be. So for example, if you have piece of a cloth, not exactly silk, and anything like cotton, if you use a flashlight in it, the lighted part will be visible, obviously, but the area would be very diffused, like very smooth. In our pixel art case, very utilized. But if you try to flashlight in a metal bulb, for example, the shine, the bright into that material would be very like in high definition. You would be able to see the circle or the square, like the rectangle, or only small lines of brightness, but they would be less smooth, less diffuse, actually pretty well defined. And about texture, in the last video, I talked about cluster. And the best way to imply texture in pixel art is using clusters. So I will handle in this way. You might have another approach, but texture is basically clusters, the size of it, how many times they are repeated, and their inner content. So now we need to make things. So let me try to make something right here. This should be a wood. Which textures we might have in this material? Well, as I said, wood usually is not reflective, so we do not need to make images of things that are surrounding this blank because it is not reflective. The specular as well the reflection depends upon the what is this history. If it is wax, this will be very reflective and even specular. But if it not, does not need that much of specular light in it. But the texture would be used clusters, would be long bands. I know this might not be read as good at first. Well, I don't know. I think this is pretty okay. This might not be that much red as wood. Yeah, I think this might be red as wood because imagine this is like a side view of a tree can be totally being red as wood. For metal, we would need reflection. So I don't know, I will try to yeah, so even without the other things, this implied that this metal ball is inside of a room that there is like a lot of things going on. So I think this alone is pretty able to make already this read as something very reflective. Now let's make this more specular. As I said, specularity is not about like a bright spot would take a lot of space, but the specularity is actually how defined, like in the idea of high definition, how defined a bright might be. So this is reflecting only parts that kinda is projecting light in it. So it's not like a less specular that would diffuse a lot of this brightness in the rest of the ball. It's actually these very few bright points is well defined. Last but not least, texture. So now I think it is read as a metal ball that is not new because even the other one could be read as metal, but I wanted to add texture in it and basically clusters to transmit the idea of old ball. So that's why I add a lot of, for example, rusties or in scares in this sphere. So whenever you are trying to make surface, a face, a vertex, a light, highlight, and etc. Right? Of anything, it is a good idea to think what material this is made from and to decide like how you would transmit the idea of that material. Think in these three things. First, ideally, first is about the reflection because the other parts usually like is the additional. Think how reflective these materials are. So mirrors, metals, and water with a dark background are very reflective. The other things might not reflect that much, and I'm not talking about shadows, alright? I'm talking about the reflection, like the other images that is projected like in the skin, in the surface of this subject. Secondly, is how well defined the speculars are. If it is something that is really defined, so as metals or waxed things, the shines will be very defined. But if it's something less specular, the shines will be very diffuse. So try to face like how much antializing you would put in a specular, all right, into the highlight. Try to think in that way if you're confused. But the how dark something becomes is also this diffuse of light. So if a light is hitting now cloth, for example, that part would be very clear, but not that long. The shadow would take the place. So the specularity is what I referred, but actually is about how the light would behave in this surface. Last but not least is the texture, and the texture could be faced as the clusters placement. So if there is a lot of clusters, so we are actually implying that is something that repeats, such as scales, O's, and etc. Or actually it's a more smoother surface. So actually the lack of cluster is also implying texture. With these three things, I think you're able to make any material you want. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.